just let your word bless us. Fill us full of hope and joy as it does. Hello everyone, you'll have to forgive me today. I've got a bit of a frog in my throat, but still I'll do the best I can. This message is called The Stone of Destruction. That doesn't sound very nice, but we'll get around to explaining that. Now, over many centuries, we have witnessed the rise and fall of 9 great empires. That's since AD, since Christ. 9 great empires that had their tentacles in many nations around the world or around their geo-economical sphere of influence. I can list these. 1 is Mandarin China. 2 is the Ottoman Turkey Empire. The Portuguese Empire. The British Empire. The French colonial empire. The Dutch Empire. And the Spanish Empire. And we can add to that list, we'll see. These aren't in any given particular order. But we can add one to the list, and it's called the Holy Roman Austrian Hungarian Empire. Russia and China were never empires. Russia and Japan were never empires. The Soviet Union was a federation, and it didn't have any colonies, even though it had states around it, but they were all part of the federation. And apparently they were free to come and go as they pleased. They weren't colonies. Japan never had empires. The Soviet Union was a federation, like I said, and the Japanese advances were imperialistic temporary takeovers that didn't last long enough to be established for economic trade and political alliances. I can count one more that still exists, but which is fast heading for the same exit. That is, of course, the United States of America. America is a true empire of extreme dominance. Now, is there to be a 10th global empire? I'm not just looking at the GDP of nations in selecting this list, but to their military and geopolitical influence and reach. These are the ones that exerted military, religio-political and economic power or support in, among, or over other nations of the world at large. They colonised. Now you can argue the case for others if you like, but I'm only suggesting the obvious and well-known historical empires. So there is likely to be 10 all up. And if you see any biblical prophecy that might apply to that, be my guest. I said 10 all up because there is another spanner in the works, but to this day Italy disputes whether it had a colonial empire, but it could be called an empire, and people do. And there's your 10 toes. What 10 toes are you talking about? Oh, I'll tell you. What I'm saying, that such nations, whoever they may be or what number, are like stones or marbles in custard. If you're eating the custard, you sure know they're there. There is a prophecy in the Bible that speaks of these end-time powers. Those end-time powers that have been or still are standouts. Let's turn to Daniel chapter 2, verse 29. Now, the backstory to the Daniel dream interpretation we find there is that King Nebuchadnezzar of the Empire of Babylon had a dream. And he was about to put his wise men to death if they couldn't tell him not only what his dream meant, but even what the dream actually was, because the king had forgotten. That's nice for them, isn't it? In the end, Daniel beseeched God, who gave him both the dream and the interpretation, and the heads didn't roll. Lucky them. Basically, in the dream, the king saw a giant statue with a head of gold, a chest of silver, loins and thighs of bronze, and legs of iron. So we are given an interpretation by Daniel in which we find a hierarchy of empires that is well understood, and it begins with the golden head representing the Babylonian Empire as told to Daniel, and this was to be followed by the surmised but historically lesser kingdoms of the Persians, and then the Greeks, and finally by Rome, the Iron Empire of strength. And that's how history turned out. But wait, there's more. The feet got a mention too. And they were to be a further dominion that was a mixture of iron and clay, as feet of iron, but with toes of clay, or a mixture of iron and clay in the feet. This represents the empires that were to come, but in this new situation mixed incongruously in a loose-fitting association with the clay of other smaller nations and lands. So there turned out to be great empires with commonwealths and federations of other lesser nations or states, colonies of other lesser nations or states of clay, so to speak. And after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was a period of religious and pagan nomadic rulers subjugating the world until the end of the Austrian Hungary Holy Roman Empire. This was mainly a religious empire, but still the first notable political empire as well. On the other side of the world, the Mandarin Chinese defeated the roaming hordes of Genghis Khan of the Mongols in the 13th century, and the Ming dynasty then became firmly entrenched in China. That country then saw an expansion of their empire of iron mixed with clay under the rule of Emperor Zhou. And this empire extended along the famed Silk Road all the way to Europe. The rest of history is not necessary here because this isn't a history lesson. And it's just the same old, same old. We have empires, colonial empires. However, we are coming to the crux of the matter shortly. Looking at the world today, it would appear that the sole remaining empire, the USA, is in a state of decline. But nothing is really threatening it just yet. The people living in this world as it stands are trembling about their own future though. Nuclear war and possible demise by global warming sit poised around the corner, ready to take all of mankind into oblivion, and the world is afraid. And we know that many elites have already built their caves to hide in from the face of the Almighty. Oh, now I mention the Almighty. Yes, I sure do, because at the end of all this, God has not left his people without hope. The Almighty loves us. This prophecy in Daniel is one that has given God's people hope for centuries. And right at this time in history, one that bolsters the hope we have been given in the New Testament, mainly that Jesus, the great stone, is coming back for his own people. The great stone, you may ask? Yes, we are sure of this for several reasons. And even from this dream interpretation, because after Daniel tells us about the feet of iron and clay representing those latter empires, he then sees a huge stone. Now it must be a large stone, not a pebble. It must be a literal rock of great magnitude, a boulder, because it rolls down and smashes the feet of the great statue. And this obviously destroys the whole human race and the memory of it. I can see that end because the complete statue, which represents the whole history of humanity from beginning to end, or from Nebuchadnezzar at least until the end, is said to be destroyed to dust by the stone. Literally it says, ground them to powder. Now that's even finer than dust. Nothing left that's not blown in the wind. Nothing left to history or memory. Now, many theologians think this stone, which is said to be not made with hands, is the church, which rises up to become a great boulder that defeats the whole world. But if you have faith in that process, be my guest. It doesn't seem to be happening. And there is a problem with that because the boulder is said to be not made with hands. So, In that case, we need to search the scriptures to discover who indeed was not made by hands and who indeed is referred to as a rock, or Petra in the Greek, not Petros. We know that Peter was called Petros, which only means a small stone, and never a boulder or a rock. So we need to look further, and we also need to go back and look in the Old Testament too. Now, all of that about Peter and the church might be debatable to some extent, especially if you're Catholic. But no matter, because what we do find is Jesus has definitely been referred to as the rock on more than one occasion in Scripture. Starting right at the beginning in Genesis 48:15 and 49:24, the shepherd of Israel is referred to as the stone. And we know that is prophetically referring to Jesus, the good shepherd. Samuel the prophet raised the stone of Ebenezer, meaning my stone of help. And that too is referring to Christ as a type of himself also. Such a stone would have been a monolith or large boulder, I'd say. I mean, can you imagine a prophet setting up a pebble? No, that's laughable. So we know without doubt that Christ the rock is the insinuation from such a large stone as a monolith, which is what that would have been. Also now coming over to the New Testament, we're told in Matthew 7:24 and 25 to build our house upon the rock of Christ himself. Also read 1 Corinthians 3:11 and Matthew 16:18. We need to understand this too, that we Christians are referred to as living stones. Can someone look up 1 Corinthians 3:11, please? And someone else Matthew 16:18? It doesn't matter what translation. Yeah.
That's all I've got.
Yeah, that's fine. 3:11, 1 Corinthians 3:11.
And 16:18.
Matthew 16:18, yes.
For no one can lay any foundation other than the one that has been laid. That foundation is Jesus Christ.
And that's a foundation. What are foundations made out of in those days? The foundation stone was a rock. Jesus, the rock, is our foundation. Matthew 16:18.
I certainly say that you are Peter, the stone, and I will build my assembly upon me, the rock, and Hades' gates will not triumph in an encounter with my assembly.
There you go. Jesus is the rock, not Peter. Now, so I said we need to understand this too, that we Christians are referred to as living stones, making up the temple of God, and Christ is variously the larger cornerstone, or indeed the antitype of Zerubbabel, as we saw before, the capstone. And that too is also said of Jesus in Matthew 21:42 to 44, that he is the capstone. So Jesus Christ himself, being the Son of God from eternity, is the legendary huge stone not made with hands. So we can say that the stone that comes to destroy all the world's kingdoms in Daniel's interpretation must be going to be the return of Jesus himself and not the church. So be aware, people, the final piece of iron in the clay is on the way out. It has been said that if America falls, the whole world will fall. But guess what? It will not fall on its own. The world will not fall on their own. When you see America about to crumble, take heart, for your redemption may well be drawing nigh. By what means God is going to destroy all things and burn the elements with fervent heat and roll up the sky like a scroll, we have no idea. So speculation is probably out of order. Even if we can see one looming contender in a nuclear holocaust, we still don't know how, and neither do we know the day nor the hour. But what about the year? 2026 sounds about right. Just kidding. Yes, indeed, we can be light-hearted, having so great a salvation. Be joyful and look up, because your redemption draws nigh. Let the world remain down in the mouth, but warn those you can and try and give them a hand up in the hope of the gospel. So keep busy while the day is still here, because the time is coming when you will be giving an answer for what you have done in the flesh. But be not afraid if you are one of the little stones, because you can be sure the big stone isn't going to crush you, but it will have already crushed the enemies of God. 1 Peter 2:8 says that Jesus is the rock of offence. Obviously the rock that all those enemies stumbled over and failed to see the light of salvation. So it is true that Jesus is to be the stone of destruction in Daniel. He is going to be that stone of destruction on the one hand, but on the other hand, he is the rock of our salvation. And the very thing to be sure of is what Daniel said in chapter 2, verse 45, that the dream is true and its interpretation is trustworthy. Thank you for listening.